stood before the mirror in her private dressing room at Windsor Castle, her hands trembling slightly as she watched the royal jeweler make final adjustments to the massive tiara resting on her head. The weight of it felt different from any crown she had worn before. This was not just jewelry. It was history itself, pressing down on her shoulders with the force of centuries. The tiara before her was a masterpiece that had been hidden away in the royal vault for decades. Queen Victoria had commissioned it in 1887 for her Golden Jubilee, but it had been deemed too grand, too overwhelming for any occasion. The design featured over 2,000 diamonds arranged in elaborate floral patterns, with a central sapphire the size of a robin's egg that had once belonged to a Russian empress. The piece stood nearly 6 inches tall and weighed almost 2 pounds, making it one of the most magnificent and challenging tiaras in the royal collection. "Your Royal Highness, we can make one more adjustment if needed," whispered Mr. Henderson, the elderly jeweler who had served 3 generations of the royal family. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision as he checked each diamond setting one final time. Caught her reflection and barely recognized herself. The woman looking back was transformed into something almost mythical. The tiara caught the light from every angle, creating a cascade of rainbows that danced across the walls of her dressing room. But behind the sparkle, could see the uncertainty in her own eyes. "It's perfect, Mr. Henderson. Thank you," she said softly, though her voice carried a note of anxiety that only those closest to her would recognize. The occasion calling for such grandeur was a state banquet honoring the visiting president of France and his wife. It would be his first time wearing such an elaborate piece, and the entire world would be watching. The pressure had been building for weeks as palace officials debated whether she was ready for such a significant moment in royal protocol. In the corridor outside, her lady-in-waiting, Sarah, paced nervously while checking her watch. The guests would begin arriving in less than 2 hours, and every detail had to be perfect. Sarah had been with for 7 years, watching her grow from a nervous newlywed into a confident royal, but tonight felt different. Tonight carried the weight of tradition that stretched back generations. "Ma'am, the hairdresser is ready for the final styling," Sarah announced as she entered the dressing room, then stopped short at the sight of in the full regalia. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, her professional composure slipping for just a moment. Turned slowly, the tiara catching the light and throwing brilliant sparks across the room. "Do you think it's too much?" she asked, voicing the concern that had been gnawing at her all day. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. In all her years of service, she had never seen anything quite so magnificent. "Ma'am, you look absolutely radiant. The Queen would be so proud." The mention of Queen Elizabeth brought a complex mix of emotions to his face. The late Queen had specifically requested that this tiara be brought out of storage for to wear, leaving detailed notes about when and how it should be presented. It was to be a symbol of the complete trust and confidence the monarchy placed in its role as the future queen consort. The hairdresser, a discreet woman named who had styled royal hair for 20 years, entered with her assistants. She had been briefed extensively on the tiara's weight and dimensions, and had practiced the styling technique on a replica for weeks. Every curl had to be positioned perfectly to support and showcase the massive piece without causing discomfort during the 4-hour banquet. "We'll need to create additional support with the styling," explained as she worked. "This piece requires a very specific technique that hasn't been used since Queen Mary wore it in 1925. As worked, thoughts drifted to her children. George, Charlotte, and Louis were upstairs in the nursery, likely already in their pajamas and unaware of the historical significance of what their mother was preparing to do. She wondered what they would think when they saw the photographs tomorrow, whether they would understand the responsibility that came with such moments of ceremony and tradition. William had left an hour earlier to greet the arriving dignitaries and handle the pre-dinner protocols. Before departing, he had stopped by the dressing room and been visibly moved by the sight of his wife in the full ceremonial dress and tiara. "You're absolutely stunning," he had whispered, kissing her forehead carefully to avoid disturbing her preparation. "Grandmother chose well." The dress wore beneath the tiara was equally spectacular. Designed by her favorite couturier, it was a deep midnight blue gown made from silk that had been woven exclusively for the occasion. The bodice featured intricate beadwork that complemented the diamonds in the tiara, and the flowing skirt was designed to move gracefully during the formal dinner proceedings. Every element had been chosen to work in harmony with the centerpiece that adorned her head. As put the finishing touches on the hairstyle, private secretary knocked and entered with the final evening schedule. "Ma'am, the photographers will be positioned in the throne room for portraits before the guests arrive. The French delegation has specifically requested additional documentation of tonight's proceedings for their state archives." Nodded, feeling the weight of the tiara shift slightly with the movement. She would need to be conscious of every gesture, every turn of her head throughout the evening. The piece was so substantial that sudden movements could cause strain or, worse, displacement during such a formal occasion. "I think we're ready," announced, stepping back to admire her work. The hairstyle was an elaborate updo that seemed to have been created specifically for the tiara, though in reality it had taken weeks of planning and practice to achieve the perfect balance. Sarah approached with the final accessories: diamond earrings that had belonged to the Queen Mother, and a sapphire necklace that perfectly matched the central stone in the tiara. Each piece was a family heirloom, and wearing them together created a unified look that spoke to generations of royal tradition. As stood to view herself in the full-length mirror, everyone in the room fell silent. The transformation was complete, and the woman before them was no longer just Princess of Wales. She had become a living embodiment of the monarchy itself, carrying the visual weight of centuries of tradition and ceremony. The tiara caught the light from every angle, creating an almost ethereal glow around her face. The diamonds seemed to move and dance with every breath she took, and the central sapphire appeared to hold depths that went beyond its physical beauty. This was jewelry as art, as history, as symbol, all combined into one extraordinary piece. "Ma'am, it's time," Sarah announced softly, checking her watch once more. The first photographs needed to be taken in the throne room before the guests began arriving for cocktails. Took a deep breath, feeling the tiara settle into its final position. She had worn many beautiful pieces over the years, but nothing that carried quite this level of significance. Tonight, she would be presenting herself not just as William's wife or the children's mother, but as a future queen, worthy of the trust that had been placed in her. As she walked toward the door, her steps careful and measured due to the tiara's weight, thought about all the women who had worn this piece before her. Queen Victoria, who had commissioned it as a symbol of British strength and prosperity. Queen Mary, who had worn it during some of the most challenging periods in modern royal history, and now preparing to carry that legacy into a new era. The corridor leading to the throne room was lined with palace staff, all of whom had heard whispers about the special tiara being brought out for tonight's occasion. As passed, followed by her small entourage, she could see the genuine admiration and respect in their faces. These were people who saw royal ceremony regularly, but even they recognized that tonight was exceptional. The throne room doors opened, and stepped into the grand space where some of the most important moments in royal history had unfolded. The photographers were waiting, their equipment already positioned to capture every angle of the tiara's magnificence. This would be the first official documentation of the piece being worn in nearly a century. "Your Royal Highness, if you could position yourself near the window, the natural light will showcase the diamonds beautifully," suggested the lead photographer, a man who had captured royal portraits for over 15 years. As moved into position, she felt a profound connection to all the history that surrounded her. The tiara was more than an accessory. It was a link to every woman who had worn the crown before her and to every woman who would wear it in the future. Tonight, she was not just the individual, but the keeper of tradition, the bridge between past and future. The first flash went off, capturing the moment when the Princess of Wales debuted the most magnificent tiara in the royal collection. But beyond the surface glamour, the photographs would also capture something deeper: the evolution of a young woman who had grown into her role as a future queen, ready to carry the weight of history with grace and dignity. As the photography session continued, found her confidence growing. The tiara, which had felt so overwhelming just hours before, now felt like a natural extension of herself. She was ready for the evening ahead, ready to represent the monarchy on one of its most formal occasions, and ready to show the world that tradition and modernity could exist in perfect harmony. The transformation was complete. Princess of Wales, wearing the most spectacular tiara in royal history, was ready to make her debut on the world stage in a way that would be remembered for generations to come. The throne room fell silent as the massive doors opened to reveal in her full ceremonial attire. Even the palace staff, who were accustomed to royal grandeur, stopped their preparations to stare. The tiara caught the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows, sending cascades of rainbow reflections dancing across the ornate walls and ceiling. "Magnificent," whispered the palace photographer under his breath, though he had photographed 3 generations of royals. He had never seen anything quite like the sight before him. The way the light played off the thousands of diamonds created an almost supernatural effect, as if was surrounded by captured starlight. William arrived just as the photography session was reaching its conclusion. He had finished greeting the early arriving members of the French delegation and came to check on his wife's preparations. When he saw her standing in the throne room, wearing the legendary tiara, he stopped completely in his tracks. He said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and deep affection, "You look absolutely radiant." She turned carefully toward him, mindful of the tiara's weight and the elaborate styling that held it in place. When their eyes met, William could see both confidence and a hint of nervousness in her expression. This was uncharted territory for both of them, a moment that would define how history remembered this particular era of their monarchy. "Do you think it's appropriate?" she asked, seeking his reassurance. "I know grandmother wanted me to wear it, but seeing it now, it feels almost too grand for a state dinner." William approached her slowly, taking in every detail of her appearance. The midnight blue gown flowed perfectly with her movements, and the way the tiara transformed her entire presence was remarkable. She looked like a queen from a fairy tale, yet somehow still unmistakably herself. "It's perfect," he said firmly. "You're wearing it exactly as it was meant to be worn. This is what constitutional monarchy looks like in the 21st century, respecting tradition while making it our own." The French president's wife, Madame, had specifically requested to meet before the formal dinner began. As a former museum curator with a deep appreciation for historical artifacts, she had heard rumors about the tiara that would be displayed tonight and was eager to see it in person. "Ma'am, Madame has arrived and is waiting in the blue drawing room," announced Private Secretary. "She's requested a private moment before the other guests gather." Nodded, then looked questioningly at William. State protocol dictated specific procedures for such meetings, but the personal touch often proved most effective in international diplomacy. "Let's go together," William suggested. "This feels like a moment that deserves to be shared." They walked through the castle corridors, past portraits of monarchs who had worn this same tiara or similar pieces during their own reigns. Found herself wondering about Queen Victoria's feelings when she first saw the completed tiara, whether she too had felt the overwhelming weight of history and expectation. The blue drawing room was one of Windsor's most elegant spaces, decorated in the French style that would appeal to their honored guests. Madame was examining a display case containing other royal jewelry when William entered. When she turned and saw wearing the legendary tiara, Madame actually gasped aloud. "Moan," she whispered, then immediately composed herself. "Your Royal Highness, you are absolutely magnificent. I have studied this piece in photographs and historical documents, but seeing it worn as it was intended, it takes one's breath away." Felt a warm flush of pride at the genuine appreciation in the French First Lady's voice. This was exactly the kind of cultural diplomacy that these state visits were designed to promote, sharing the beauty and history of British heritage with distinguished international guests. "Thank you so much, Madame. We understand you have particular expertise in historical jewelry," replied, grateful for the woman's enthusiasm. "Indeed, Your Highness. I curated several exhibitions on European crown jewels during my career. This piece represents the absolute pinnacle of 19th century royal craftsmanship. The way the diamonds have been set to catch light from every angle is revolutionary, even by today's standards." As they spoke, more guests began arriving for the evening's festivities. Through the windows, could see the convoy of official cars delivering diplomats, government ministers, and other dignitaries who had been invited to witness this historic occasion. The weight of the tiara was beginning to make itself known more prominently as the evening progressed. Had trained for weeks with a replica to build up the neck strength needed, but the real piece felt different, heavier not just physically, but emotionally. Every diamond seemed to carry the weight of the woman who had worn it before her. "Ma'am, we should begin moving toward the receiving line," suggested the palace's master of ceremonies, a distinguished gentleman who had orchestrated royal events for over 20 years. "The guests will begin arriving for cocktails in 15 minutes." The receiving line was a formal tradition where William would personally greet each guest as they arrived for the state banquet. For this would mean standing for nearly an hour while wearing the massive tiara, smiling and making conversation with dozens of people while being photographed constantly. "Are you comfortable enough with the wait?" William asked quietly as they made their way to the appointed position. He had been watching her carefully throughout the afternoon, knowing that this was completely new territory for his wife. "I think so," replied, though she was already calculating how to position herself to minimize strain. "The styling is holding everything perfectly in place, really knows her craft." The first guests began arriving, and the evening's formal proceedings commenced. Each person who approached the receiving line had a visible reaction to seeing in the magnificent tiara. Seasoned diplomats, who were accustomed to royal protocol and grandeur, found themselves momentarily speechless at the sight. Lady Henderson, the wife of the British ambassador to France, was among the first to be received. She had known for several years through various official functions, but seeing her transformed by the historic tiara was remarkable. "Your Royal Highness, you look absolutely stunning," Lady Henderson said warmly. "I don't think I've ever seen anything quite so beautiful." "Thank you so much," replied graciously. "It's an honor to wear such a significant piece from the collection. I hope it does justice to the occasion." The conversation continued down the line, with each guest expressing similar amazement at the tiara's magnificence. Began to feel more comfortable as the evening progressed, finding that the initial nervousness was giving way to a sense of pride and confidence in representing British royal tradition. The French delegation was particularly impressed by the display. For them, this level of ceremony and historical presentation represented the kind of cultural heritage that formed the foundation of strong international relationships. The tiara was not just jewelry. It was a symbol of the continuity and stability that the British monarchy represented. Minister, who served as the French Foreign Secretary, had brought his wife specifically to witness this historic debut. As a scholar of European history, she understood the significance of bringing such a piece out of storage for a state occasion. "Your Majesty," she said to William as they were introduced, "this is truly spectacular. To see such a piece worn as it was intended, rather than simply displayed in a case, brings the history to life in a remarkable way." William beamed with pride as he glanced toward. "My wife has really embraced the responsibility of preserving and presenting our royal heritage. Tonight felt like the perfect occasion to share this particular treasure." As the receiving line continued, photographers captured dozens of images from every conceivable angle. The tiara photographed beautifully, with the professional lighting bringing out every facet of the thousands of diamonds. These images would be distributed worldwide, giving people everywhere their first glimpse of this legendary piece being worn in nearly a century. Behind the scenes, palace staff were managing the complex logistics of the evening. The state banquet required precise timing and coordination to ensure that everything proceeded smoothly. The head butler, Mr., had served at Windsor for 35 years and had overseen countless formal dinners, but tonight felt special even to his experienced eye. "The princess looks absolutely radiant," he commented to his assistant as they did a final check of the dining room preparations. "I remember when Queen Mary wore that tiara. To see it again, worn with such grace and confidence, brings back wonderful memories of royal ceremony at its finest." The dining room itself had been prepared with meticulous attention to detail. The table was set with the finest china, crystal, and silver from the royal collection. Flowers had been arranged to complement the blue of his gown and the sparkle of her tiara. Every element was designed to create a cohesive presentation of British royal hospitality. As the receiving line concluded and guests began moving toward the dining room for cocktails, felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The most challenging part of the evening was complete, and she had managed to represent the monarchy with the dignity and grace that the occasion demanded. "You were wonderful," William whispered to her as they prepared to join their guests for the pre-dinner reception. "Grandmother would be so proud of how you've honored the tradition while making it completely your own." The cocktail reception allowed for more informal conversation, though remained constantly aware of the tiara's presence and weight. Guests approached her throughout the evening, many requesting to hear the history behind the piece she was wearing. The story she told became more polished with each telling. Queen Victoria's commission of the piece for her Golden Jubilee, the decades it had spent in storage, too grand for regular occasions. the late Queen's specific request that be the one to bring it back into public view. Each retelling reinforced the significance of the moment they were all witnessing. As the time approached for dinner to be served, realized that what had begun as a daunting challenge had transformed into one of the most meaningful experiences of her royal career. She was not just wearing a beautiful tiara. She was actively participating in the continuation of a tradition that stretched back generations, while adapting it for a new era of constitutional monarchy. The moment arrived for the procession into George's Hall for the state banquet itself. Took William's arm as they prepared to lead their distinguished guests into the magnificent dining space. The weight of the tiara had become more manageable as the evening progressed, though she remained constantly aware of its presence and the historical significance it represented. The great doors to George's Hall opened to reveal a breathtaking scene. The massive table, which could accommodate over 150 guests, was set with the finest pieces from the royal collection. Golden candelabras cast warm light across the pristine white tablecloth, while arrangements of white roses and blue delphiniums created elegant centerpieces that complemented gown without competing with her spectacular tiara. As and William entered the hall, followed by President and his wife, a murmur of appreciation rippled through the assembled guests. The sight of wearing the legendary tiara in this grand setting was truly magnificent. The vaulted ceiling of George's Hall seemed to amplify the sparkle of the diamonds, creating an almost magical atmosphere that would be remembered by everyone present. "Extraordinary," whispered the German ambassador to his wife as they took their seats. "I've attended state banquets around the world, but I've never seen anything quite like this presentation." The seating arrangement had been planned meticulously over several weeks. Was positioned at the head table between President and the Archbishop of Canterbury, while William sat across from her with Madame and the Prime Minister. The placement ensured that the most important diplomatic conversations could take place while allowing maximum visibility of historic attire. As the first course was served, found herself engaged in fascinating conversation with President about the cultural significance of royal ceremonies in modern diplomacy. He was particularly interested in how the British monarchy balanced respect for tradition with the need to remain relevant in contemporary society. "Your Royal Highness," President said warmly, "what you've accomplished tonight represents exactly this balance. To bring such a magnificent piece of history into a modern diplomatic setting creates a bridge between past and present that is truly remarkable." Felt deeply moved by his words. This was exactly what she had hoped to achieve, showing that royal tradition could enhance rather than overshadow meaningful diplomatic relationships. The tiara was serving its purpose not just as beautiful jewelry, but as a symbol of the continuity and stability that the monarchy represented. Across the table, Madame was discussing the technical aspects of the tiara's construction with the Archbishop, who had a surprising knowledge of historical jewelry due to his interest in ceremonial religious artifacts. Their conversation was attracting the attention of nearby guests, all of whom were fascinated by the rare opportunity to see such a piece being worn. The craftsmanship required to create something of this magnitude in 1887 was extraordinary, Madame explained. Every diamond had to be cut and set by hand, and the engineering required to make it both beautiful and wearable was revolutionary for its time. The Archbishop nodded thoughtfully. "It reminds me of the great medieval crowns and ecclesiastical pieces. There's something profound about jewelry that carries such historical weight. It connects us to generations of people who valued beauty and craftsmanship as expressions of the sacred." Listened to their discussion with growing appreciation for the piece she was wearing. She had studied its history extensively in preparation for tonight, but hearing experts discuss its significance from their different perspectives deepened her understanding of its cultural importance. The menu for the evening had been chosen to reflect both British culinary traditions and French influences, honoring their distinguished guests while showcasing the finest elements of royal hospitality. Each course was presented with impeccable timing, allowing conversation to flow naturally between the various tables throughout the hall. During the fish course, noticed that many of the younger diplomats and staff members were particularly captivated by the tiara. For them, this was likely their first opportunity to see such a significant piece of royal history being worn in its intended setting. Their genuine enthusiasm reminded her that she was not just participating in diplomatic protocol, but also serving as a custodian of cultural heritage for future generations. Sir Charles, the British ambassador to the European Union, approached during a brief lull in the dinner service to express his appreciation for the evening's presentation. "Ma'am, if I may say so, tonight's dinner has created exactly the kind of positive impression that strengthens our international relationships. The French delegation has been genuinely moved by the ceremony and hospitality." Felt a deep satisfaction at hearing this feedback. The months of planning and preparation, the careful consideration of every detail, the decision to bring the tiara out of storage, all of it was serving the larger purpose of representing Britain with dignity and grace on the international stage. The conversation at her table turned to the challenges of preserving historical artifacts while making them accessible to new generations. President shared stories of similar dilemmas faced by French museums and cultural institutions, while described the careful balance the royal collection maintained between preservation and public engagement. "The decision to wear this piece tonight wasn't taken lightly," explained. "There were extensive consultations with conservators and historians to ensure that it could be worn safely without compromising its integrity. But ultimately, we felt that jewelry of this significance deserves to be seen as it was intended, worn and celebrated, not simply stored away." As the main course was being served, William caught eye from across the table and smiled warmly. She could see the pride and admiration in his expression, and it gave her an additional boost of confidence for the remainder of the evening. They were truly partners in this endeavor, representing the monarchy together while honoring the legacy they had inherited. The background music, provided by a string quartet positioned discreetly in an alcove, created a perfect for the elegant conversations taking place throughout the hall. The musicians had chosen pieces that would complement rather than compete with the discussions, adding to the overall atmosphere of refined celebration. Lady, who served as senior lady-in-waiting, was positioned at a nearby table where she could discreetly monitor the evening's proceedings. She had been involved in the planning process from the beginning and felt deeply satisfied to see everything unfolding so beautifully. The risk they had taken in bringing out such a significant piece was proving to have been exactly the right decision. During the dessert course, President stood to offer a toast that would officially recognize the historic nature of the evening. The entire hall fell silent as he raised his glass, his words carrying the weight of diplomatic protocol and genuine appreciation. "Your Majesty's honored guests," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the great hall. "Tonight we have witnessed something truly extraordinary. Princess' presentation in this magnificent tiara represents more than beautiful ceremonial display. It demonstrates the living nature of your royal traditions, the way they continue to evolve and inspire while maintaining their essential dignity and significance." He paused, looking directly at with obvious respect and admiration. "Madame la Princess, you embody the very best of what constitutional monarchy can offer: respect for history, combined with grace for the present moment. France salutes both your personal elegance and the institution you represent with such distinction." The toast was received with enthusiastic applause from every guest in the hall. Felt deeply moved by the President's words, which perfectly captured what she had hoped to achieve through this evening's presentation. This was diplomacy at its finest, using beauty, tradition, and genuine hospitality to strengthen international relationships. As she stood to respond to the toast, felt the full weight of the tiara and the responsibility it represented. But instead of feeling burdened, she felt empowered. This was her moment to speak not just as an individual, but as a representative of generations of women who had worn the crown before her. "Mr. President, Madame, distinguished guests," she began, her voice clear and confident despite the magnitude of the moment. "Your presence here tonight honors not just William and me personally, but the enduring friendship between our nations. This tiara, which hasn't been worn for nearly a century, represents the continuity of that friendship and our shared commitment to preserving beauty and culture for future generations." Her words were met with another round of applause, this one even more enthusiastic than the first. Could see genuine emotion in the faces around the table, and she realized that the evening had achieved something beyond successful diplomatic protocol. It had created a moment of genuine human connection across cultural and national boundaries. The remainder of the dinner proceeded with animated conversation at every table. Guests were clearly energized by the historic nature of what they were witnessing, and the level of engagement exceeded even the most optimistic expectations of the palace staff who had planned the event. As the evening wound toward its conclusion, reflected on how profoundly the experience had affected her. What had begun as a daunting challenge had evolved into one of the most meaningful experiences of her royal career. She was not just wearing a beautiful piece of jewelry. She was actively participating in the continuation of a tradition that connected past, present, and future in a chain of shared human experience. As the formal dinner concluded and guests began moving to the crimson drawing room for coffee and liqueurs, felt a profound shift in how she experienced wearing the magnificent tiara. What had initially felt like an overwhelming responsibility had transformed into a natural extension of her role as a modern royal woman honoring timeless traditions. The crimson drawing room provided a more intimate setting for the evening's final phase. The rich red silk wall coverings and ornate gilded furniture created a warm, welcoming atmosphere that encouraged more personal conversations between the international guests. Here, diplomacy could continue in a relaxed environment while still maintaining the formal elegance that such occasions demanded. Madame approached as they settled into the drawing room, carrying 2 delicate cups of coffee and wearing an expression of genuine warmth that went beyond diplomatic courtesy. "Your Royal Highness, I hope you won't mind my saying that this evening has been absolutely magical," she said, offering one of the cups. "As someone who has spent her career studying royal artifacts, seeing this tiara worn as it was intended has been truly extraordinary. But more than that, watching you carry yourself with such natural grace while wearing it has been inspiring." Accepted the coffee gratefully, finding that the warm porcelain felt grounding after hours of careful movement with the tiara's weight. "Thank you so much for saying that, Madame. I must admit, I was terrified when we first made the decision to bring it out of storage. There's something quite humbling about wearing a piece that carries so much history." Their conversation was overheard by several nearby guests, including the wife of the Canadian High Commissioner, who had been fascinated by the evening's display of royal ceremony. She had grown up reading about such tiaras in history books, never imagining she would one day see such a piece worn in its proper setting. "Ma'am, if I may ask," she said respectfully, "what was it like when you first saw the tiara? I imagine it must have been quite overwhelming." Smiled, remembering her initial reaction in the vault beneath the castle. "It truly was overwhelming. When Mr. Henderson first brought it up from storage, I couldn't believe something so magnificent had been hidden away for so long. But then I realized that was exactly why tonight felt so important. These pieces were created to be worn and celebrated, not simply preserved in isolation." The conversation attracted the attention of other guests, who gathered in an informal circle around. This kind of spontaneous interaction was exactly what the evening's organizers had hoped would develop during the more relaxed portion of the program. Formal state banquets could sometimes feel stiff and protocol-driven, but the addition of such an extraordinary visual element had created natural opportunities for genuine cultural exchange. President joined the group, carrying his own coffee and looking thoroughly satisfied with how the evening had unfolded. "Your Highness, I've been thinking about what you said during your toast about continuity and friendship between nations. This tiara really does represent that concept beautifully. Something created during Queen Victoria's reign, being worn tonight to honor contemporary relationships. It's a perfect symbol of how tradition can enhance rather than constrain modern diplomacy." William approached from across the room, where he had been engaged in conversation with several of the British government ministers who had attended the banquet. He could see how animated and engaged had become as the evening progressed, and it filled him with pride to watch her natural ability to connect with people from diverse backgrounds and cultures. "Are you managing the weight all right?" he asked quietly as he joined the circle, referring to both the physical weight of the tiara and the ceremonial weight of the entire evening. "I think I'm getting stronger as the night goes on," replied with a smile that combined both literal and metaphorical truth. "It's remarkable how something that felt so daunting a few hours ago now feels like such a natural part of representing our heritage." The German ambassador, who had been quietly observing from nearby, chose this moment to share his own perspective on the evening's significance. "Your Royal Highnesses, as someone who has attended state functions across Europe for many years, I can say that tonight has been truly exceptional. The way you've balanced formal ceremony with genuine warmth has created exactly the kind of cultural diplomacy that strengthens international relationships." His words sparked a broader discussion about the role of monarchy in modern international relations. Several of the assembled diplomats shared their observations about how different constitutional monarchies approached the balance between tradition and contemporary relevance, with tonight's presentation being cited as a particularly successful example. Lady Sarah, the wife of the Singapore High Commissioner, had been taking careful mental notes throughout the evening for a cultural report she would write for her government. Your Highness, what strikes me most about tonight is how you've made something so historically significant feel accessible and relevant. In Singapore, we're always looking for ways to honor our heritage while remaining modern and forward-thinking. Tonight has been an inspiring example of how that balance can be achieved. Felt deeply moved by the international perspective these conversations were providing. She had known the evening would be significant for British royal history, but hearing how it resonated with representatives from around the world gave her a broader understanding of its impact. The palace photographer, who had been discreetly capturing candid moments throughout the evening, approached to request one final formal portrait in the drawing room setting. The natural light from the crystal chandeliers would provide a different effect than the earlier portraits, showing how the tiara looked in the more intimate environment of the evening's conclusion. Ma'am, if we could position you near the fireplace, the warm light will create beautiful contrast with the diamonds, he suggested professionally. As moved into position, the entire group of international guests gathered to watch this final documentation of the historic evening. Many of them would likely never see such a significant piece of royal jewelry worn again, and they wanted to witness every possible moment of the experience. The photographs captured not just individual beauty in the magnificent tiara, but also the genuine admiration and engagement of the international guests surrounding her. These images would become part of the historical record, documenting not just what she wore, but how successfully the evening had achieved its diplomatic objectives. Minister, who had been relatively quiet throughout the evening while observing the proceedings from a diplomatic perspective, finally approached to share his professional assessment of the night's success. Your Royal Highness, from a diplomatic standpoint, tonight has exceeded every expectation, he said with obvious sincerity. The French delegation will return home with not just positive memories of British hospitality, but with a renewed appreciation for the cultural heritage that forms the foundation of our international relationships. This kind of cultural diplomacy is invaluable in today's world. Felt a profound sense of accomplishment at hearing such feedback. The months of planning, the careful consideration of every detail, the personal challenge of wearing such a significant piece, all of it had served the larger purpose of strengthening international relationships while honoring royal tradition. As the evening began winding toward its official conclusion, guests started making their formal farewells. Each departure provided another opportunity for personal interaction, with many of the international visitors expressing their gratitude for being included in such a historic occasion. The French delegation's departure was particularly meaningful, given that they had been the guests of honor for the evening. President and his wife both expressed their profound appreciation for the ceremony and hospitality they had experienced. Your Majesties, President said during his formal farewell, tonight will be remembered as a perfect example of how constitutional monarchy can serve as a bridge between past and future, between tradition and progress. Princess' presentation has honored both French guests and British heritage in the most beautiful possible way. As the last of the international guests departed, finally allowed herself to truly relax for the first time in many hours. The tiara, which had felt so monumentally significant at the beginning of the evening, now felt like a natural part of her appearance. She had successfully carried the weight of history and tradition while making them entirely her own. William joined her in the now-quiet drawing room, both of them still processing the magnitude of what they had just experienced and accomplished together. How do you feel? He asked, looking at his wife with obvious admiration and pride. Honestly, replied, touching the tiara gently with one hand, I feel like I've grown into something I didn't know I was capable of becoming. This evening has changed how I understand my role and my responsibilities as a future queen. The transformation was complete, but rather than an ending, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter in both their personal journey and their service to the monarchy and the nation they would one day lead together. The castle had grown quiet except for the soft sounds of staff efficiently clearing away the remnants of the evening's grand celebration. Stood before the mirror in her private dressing room once again. But this time, the woman looking back at her seemed fundamentally changed from the nervous princess who had first donned the magnificent tiara hours earlier. The hairdresser worked with gentle precision to carefully remove the tiara while preserving as much of the elaborate styling as possible. Each movement was deliberate and careful, as the piece was far too valuable and historically significant to risk any damage during the removal process. "Ma'am, you've worn it beautifully tonight," said softly as she worked. "I've styled hair for 3 generations of royals, but I've never seen anyone carry such a significant piece with more natural grace." Felt the weight lifting gradually from her head as the tiara was secured in its specially designed case. Without it, she felt oddly lighter, almost as if she had been walking underwater and suddenly surfaced. But rather than relief, she experienced an unexpected sense of loss. The tiara had become part of her identity for the evening, and its absence left her feeling somehow incomplete. "Thank you, your work tonight was absolutely perfect," replied, gently touching her hair where the tiara had rested. "I couldn't have managed without your expertise." William entered the dressing room carrying 2 cups of tea, a small but meaningful gesture after such a formal and demanding evening. He had already changed out of his formal attire, but could see in his face the same sense of profound satisfaction that she was experiencing. "I thought you might want something warm before we debrief the evening," he said, offering her one of the cups. "How are you feeling now that it's all over?" Accepted the tea gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm porcelain and allowing herself to truly relax for the first time in many hours. "Honestly, I feel like a completely different person than I was this morning. Not just because of the tiara itself, but because of what wearing it represented, the responsibility, the history, the trust that's been placed in us." They settled into the comfortable chairs near the window, still wearing their formal attire, but finally able to speak freely without the careful consideration that public appearances demanded. The night sky beyond the windows was clear, stars visible despite the lights of Windsor, creating a peaceful backdrop for their private conversation. "The feedback from the French delegation was extraordinary," William said, reviewing the brief notes his private secretary had provided about the evening's diplomatic success. President's staff indicated that this kind of cultural presentation exceeded their expectations and will be remembered as a highlight of his state visit. Smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction at hearing confirmation of what she had sensed throughout the evening. Madame was so knowledgeable about the tiara's history. Having someone with her expertise genuinely appreciate seeing it worn as intended made the whole experience feel even more meaningful. Sarah entered quietly, carrying his evening bag and the various small items that had been needed throughout the night. She had been his constant companion for years, but even she seemed affected by the historical significance of what had just occurred. "Ma'am, the palace photographer wanted me to let you know that the images from tonight are absolutely spectacular," Sarah reported with obvious excitement. "He said he's never captured anything quite so magnificent in all his years of royal photography." The mention of the photographs reminded that this evening's impact would extend far beyond the immediate diplomatic success. These images would be distributed worldwide, giving people everywhere their first glimpse of this legendary tiara being worn in nearly a century. Future historians would study tonight's pictures as documentation of how the monarchy honored tradition while remaining relevant in contemporary international relations. "I keep thinking about all the women who wore this piece before me," mused, sipping her tea and gazing out at the castle grounds. "Queen Victoria when it was first created, Queen Mary during some of the most challenging periods in modern royal history. I wonder if they felt the same mixture of honor and responsibility that I experienced tonight." William reached over to take her hand, a gesture of both affection and recognition of what she had accomplished. "I think what made tonight so special was watching you make it completely your own while still honoring its history. You weren't trying to imitate anyone who came before, you were creating something entirely new." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Mr. Henderson, the royal jeweler, had come to personally oversee the secure return of the tiara to its storage vault. His weathered face showed the satisfaction of a craftsman whose work had been perfectly executed. "Your Royal Highness, the tiara will be carefully cleaned and examined before being returned to storage," he explained as he secured the case. but I wanted you to know that wearing it tonight has actually enhanced its historical value. Future scholars will study this evening as a perfect example of how royal jewelry serves its intended purpose, bringing beauty and meaning to significant occasions. After Mr. Henderson departed with his precious cargo, found herself processing the full magnitude of what the evening had represented. This hadn't just been about wearing beautiful jewelry or following royal protocol. She had actively participated in creating a moment that would be remembered as part of the monarchy's evolution in the 21st century. "Do you think we'll ever bring it out again?" she asked William, already missing the weight and presence of the magnificent piece. "I hope so," he replied thoughtfully. "But I think tonight proved that when we do, it needs to be for occasions that truly deserve such significance. This can't become routine. Its power comes partly from its rarity." Over the following days, the international reaction to its debut in the historic tiara exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Newspapers around the world featured the images prominently, with fashion experts, historians, and cultural commentators all weighing in on the significance of the moment. The French press was particularly enthusiastic, with running a full-page spread titled "The Princess Who Brought History to Life." The article praised not just its beauty in the tiara, but her diplomatic skill in using such a significant piece to honor international relationships while showcasing British heritage. Back in London, the response from the British public was overwhelmingly positive. Social media was filled with images from the evening, and royal fashion experts analyzed every detail of its presentation. But beyond the surface glamour, commentators noted the deeper significance of using royal tradition to strengthen modern diplomatic relationships. Museum curators from around the world reached out to the palace, requesting information about the tiara's construction and history. The evening had sparked renewed interest in royal jewelry as historical artifact rather than mere decoration, exactly the kind of cultural engagement that justified bringing such pieces out of storage. 3 weeks later, received a personal letter from Madame, written on official French government stationery, but clearly expressing personal rather than diplomatic sentiments. "Dear Princess," the letter began, "I wanted to express my continued admiration for the evening you created at Windsor Castle. As someone who has dedicated her career to preserving cultural heritage, I was deeply moved by your demonstration that historical artifacts achieve their highest purpose when they are shared and celebrated rather than simply preserved. Your presentation that night will be remembered as a perfect example of how tradition can enhance rather than constrain modern relationships." The letter concluded with an invitation to visit the French National Jewelry Collection during their next state visit to Paris, an opportunity that would allow for continued cultural exchange and learning between the two nations. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Lady Mary, who had served as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Mary during the 1920s, wrote from her retirement home in Scotland. At 97 years old, she was one of the few people still alive who remembered seeing the tiara worn during its previous era. "My dear Princess," her letter read in carefully formed handwriting, "I wanted you to know that watching you wear Queen Victoria's tiara brought back the most wonderful memories of royal ceremony at its finest. But more than that, seeing how naturally you carried yourself while wearing such a magnificent piece gave me great confidence in the future of our monarchy. You honored the past while making it entirely your own, exactly as Queen Mary herself would have wanted." As read these letters and reflected on the evening's lasting impact, she realized that the experience had fundamentally changed her understanding of her role within the royal family. She was not just a custodian of beautiful objects, but an active participant in keeping cultural heritage alive and meaningful for contemporary audiences. The tiara had returned to its secure storage, but the confidence and sense of purpose had gained from wearing it remained. She had proven to herself and to the world that she could carry the weight of history while making it relevant for modern times. This was the essence of constitutional monarchy in the 21st century, respecting tradition while ensuring it remained a living, breathing part of contemporary culture. Months later, when planning future state occasions, would often think back to that transformative evening at Windsor Castle. The memory of wearing Queen Victoria's magnificent tiara had become more than just a personal milestone. It had become a touchstone for understanding how individual moments of ceremony and tradition could serve larger purposes of diplomacy, cultural preservation, and public service. The woman who had stood nervously before her mirror that afternoon, uncertain whether she was worthy of such a magnificent piece, had been transformed into a confident representative of everything the modern monarchy could achieve. She had learned to carry not just the physical weight of diamonds and precious metals, but the emotional and cultural weight of centuries of tradition, making them both a natural and meaningful part of her service to the crown and to the people she would one day serve as queen.